All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks again for coming down and listening to another AZOI Weekly Update podcast. We're really excited because as we jump into 2025, we're starting something a little bit new, a little bit different, and a little bit more fresh. You've seen Justin and I talk about relevant commercial real estate topics, and you've heard kind of how we've provided insight and guidance from some of the experts outside that we work with on a day-to-day basis. But I'm really pleased today to sit down with a true expert, an industry market specific expert on title and escrow. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome onto the AZOI Weekly Podcast, Eric Wolfe from Chicago Title. Eric, thanks for coming down, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing great, Ricky. I appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking some time. You know, title and escrow specifically is one of those things that we all know it's a very necessary thing to transact on real estate. But more specifically than anything else, you know, there's a billion different companies out there that claim to provide kind of the same exact services. Let's start, you know, kind of high level more than anything else. Tell me about, you know, who you are, you know, who you work for, kind of those things.
Yeah, great. Well, my name's Eric Wolfe. I'm the commercial sales manager at Chicago Title for Arizona. Been doing this for Chicago Title for about 10 years now.
Okay.
I've been in the industry for 22.
Okay.
Started out as a broker doing exactly what you've been doing for the last handful of years.
Nice.
And then worked for CoStar for 5 or 6 years, kind of in between brokerage and my title career. So got a great education on the broker side of things and the life cycle of a deal.
Yeah.
And then learned a lot about, you know, the research and information side of things, you know, more than I had learned as a broker, as well as internet marketing through LoopNet and some of those other companies that CoStar has acquired over the years. And I was lucky. I had one of my original mentors when I was a broker hire me from CoStar to come over to Chicago Title and kind of learn from him and you know, kind of, I guess, be the succession plan for when he decided to retire. So yeah, I became commercial sales manager in May of 2022.
Okay.
Got a couple people under me as you know, as my sales team, and we've got a couple of commercial specific escrow offices around town at Biltmore and Raintree, and so yeah.
Great, man. So you kind of, more than anyone else that's just kind of gone into the BD role within a title company, you've lived all aspects of the commercial real estate cycle. You've done brokerage, you've done the marketing stuff with CoStar LoopNet, which is obviously the largest marketing agency in the world for commercial real estate.
Yeah.
And now on the title escrow side of things, maybe looking at that specifically, for those kind of unfamiliar, I'm a preschooler. Give me 1,000-foot overview of what kind of the traditional services are provided by title and escrow companies.
Sure. So, you know, our business is broken up into two main components, title and escrow, and they are two very different aspects of what we do.
Okay.
You know, the escrow side of things is more of the process. You know, we are kind of the hub of the wheel of a transaction, where we're going to be handling, you know, we're the neutral third party, where we're going to be handling monies, we're going to be handling paperwork, and going to be kind of the repository for all that information and all of that paperwork, in order to make sure that title is transferred legally and correctly from seller to buyer.
Okay.
We also work with lenders for refinances because they require a lender's policy of title insurance.
Gotcha.
When you get a new loan, or you know, whether that's associated with the sale transaction, or if it's just an independent refinance.
Just recording an deed of trust or something like that on the real estate. Okay,
right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so the title side of our business is the insurance piece, and so that's where it gets a little bit more confusing, I think, for people, because, you know, it seems like, I think one of the misnomers of our industry is that title is just a commodity.
Sure.
And we get that a lot. And while I would say, yes, if you get a title policy from, you know, one of the major carriers, you know, we're all financially solvent to be able to pay a claim.
Sure.
But part of that is whether you're working with an agency or working with direct, and we might talk about that in a little bit more detail here in a few minutes. But the title insurance, in a very simple explanation, is insuring the past.
Okay.
Unlike a auto policy or a life insurance policy, that you're trying to insure the future, what we're doing is we're ensuring that a new buyer has clear and marketable title to that property.
Okay.
And that nobody from the past can come and make claim to any portion of that property, whether it be use or ownership.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then from a lender side, we're ensuring that they're in first position. So if anything goes wrong and a borrower doesn't pay, and ends up going through that foreclosure process through a trustee sale, that we're ensuring that the lender is in first position to get that loan paid off before any other creditor.
Gotcha. So you're looking basically in arrears for things that might be claims on title, things that might be encumbering title. You're doing background searches on easements, power, like all these additional layers that sit underneath real estate that, for the most part, when we transact on something, we're not necessarily aware of. We know they exist,
right?
But we're not necessarily super concerned about them as long as they're not going to cause major issues down the road. And ultimately, the title side of stuff is insuring on those things, right?
Correct.
But you're really running two train tracks at the same exact time. You've got the neutral third-party escrow, and then you've got the policy that exists outside of the close of escrow, which is the title insurance policy.
Correct.
Got it.
Yep.
And we'll get into the differences of types of title insurance here down the road. But let me ask you this. I mean, everyone knows, for the most part, there's really two types of transactions that occur in real estate in general. You've got residential, and then you've got commercial. From your perspective and the things that you deal with day to day. Is there really a big difference between those two types of escrow and title policies on residential versus commercial properties?
There can be, and more often than not, there is.
Okay.
With residential, a house is typically sitting within a subdivision. A lot of times they're going to have CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions that outline the rules and regulations about what you can and can't do with your property.
Okay.
And so when when somebody comes and buys a house, a lot of what exists is kind of public and everybody knows about it. It is what it is.
Sure.
And so from a residential side, not to take too much away from it, but it's a little bit more of checking boxes and making sure that the process goes smoothly.
Sure.
From a commercial side, every deal is different. And that's kind of the complexity of it, but also the exciting part of the commercial side of title and escrow is every property is going to have different rules and regulations, and also different business plans, depending on what an investor is going to do with the property, and especially on the development side. That's where title is very important, is when somebody's going to come in, buy a piece of property, buy a piece of land, and they're going to change the use, right? Okay. They're going to take a piece of farmland, put a master plan over it, and plat the property differently than what it was before.
Makes sense.
That's where title is much more involved in making sure to protect the interest of the owner of that property, to make sure that they can do with it what they want to. For example, if there's a utility easement that runs down the middle of the property and they want to build a shopping center, an office building, an apartment complex, whatever it is, they're going to have to take that easement, that utility line, into account and whether they can build over it or not. And so
makes sense.
Understanding what is affecting title from the past as they're moving forward with the property is a critical piece of it all. And so, we provide a title commitment, and, we're in the business of tracking and knowing that history so that when somebody's coming and doing something moving forward, they've got all the information at hand to know what they can and can't do with the property.
Gotcha. Now, and maybe we look at this because obviously timelines for each type of transaction are very different. And again, we obviously, our team only does commercial transactions. It's how we focus on things. It's kind of really how we know each other more than anything else.
Yep.
Obviously, Chicago Title, being one of the largest title companies in the world, goes through and does both.
Right.
But let's look at timelines. Let's look at, obviously, development timelines we all know are a lot longer, a lot more extrapolated. But let's look at maybe a more traditional kind of transaction, 60 to 90 days.
Sure.
Take me through that process. What does a normal escrow process kind of look like on that type of transaction?
Sure. So, both residential and commercial is going to start with a purchase and sale agreement, right? And that purchase and sale agreement is, in essence, escrow instructions. And so one of the pieces of advice I have, to everybody out there who's involved in real estate, both residential and commercial, is know your purchase contract
Sure.
and really think about what's going into those timelines, because we've certainly run into situations where we get down to close of escrow, and this is residential or commercial, and somebody's out of town. Somebody's out of the country, right? It's like,
how often is that?
Yeah. You know, it's like, okay, we got to wire money,
especially during the holidays.
Yeah. You got to sign documents, and they
Sure.
have to be signed in a specific way for us to accept them, but also for the Maricopa County Recorder to accept them.
Yeah.
You know, and that's part of what our expertise is making sure that all of that comes together in a timely manner, so that when we submit it all, it doesn't get rejected.
Sure.
There's standards for how all that information is submitted, and that's part of what we do in making sure that all of that is correct.
Okay.
So from that purchase and sale agreement, we're going to open escrow. So, you know, we're going to get all the contact information, which is another critical part in that communication, is making sure that we've got all the contact information for who needs to be contacted, who needs to be copied on the transaction. You know, on commercial transactions, most times, there's going to be attorneys involved, right?
Sure.
And other parties to the transaction besides on a residential transaction,
Just
buyer,
the
seller, and the mortgage
Yeah,
broker,
yeah.
right?
And that can include additional parties, you know, associations. That can include attorneys on both the buy and sell side,
and for the
shareholders
lender
on both of
side.
that, the lender side.
Correct.
Yeah. So
Correct.
so you've got a significant amount of more people that you have to kind of bring into the fold
Right.
in that escrow process.
Yeah,
Okay.
you know, on the residential side, you know, typically there's probably 3 or 4 parties, right?
Yeah.
Buyer, seller, the brokers representing each side, and the lender.
Gotcha.
You know, we could have a mortgage broker and a lender and attorneys for both buyer, seller, development partners. I mean, there's, you know, and the brokers on both sides, and maybe attorneys for everybody.
Yeah.
So, you know, getting that contact information early on to get everything kicked off properly is critical. Right.
Gotcha.
We certainly don't want anybody to be left out of that communication.
Okay.
You know, that's critical to that decision making. So once we open escrow, we're going to order what's called a title commitment, and that title commitment order goes to a processing facility where we have title examiners who specialize in reviewing what we call a chain of title, and that chain of title is, in essence, everything that's ever been recorded against a piece of property.
Okay.
If there's ever been a lot split, if there's ever been, you know, declarations for how it's going to be developed, amendments to those declarations, easements, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And they review that chain of title to create this title commitment. And that title commitment is us putting, you know, our insurance out there to say, you know, if we satisfy these requirements and everybody knows about all of these things affecting title, we can close escrow.
Gotcha.
So that commitment then is a requirement to make a survey, right? And so especially on a development side, that survey is a critical piece of it.
Yeah.
Understanding where all those easements are and where all the, you know, all those recorded documents that affect title, where they lay and how they affect the property.
Gotcha.
You know, the buyer is going to submit an earnest deposit. We're going to submit an earnest deposit receipt. And one of the services that we provide that most people think is an industry standard and a requirement is a critical dates letter. As people work with escrow officers that are either in different markets or more on the residential side, they're going to learn that that may or may not be a service. And so we've had a couple of situations even this year with out-of-state escrow and the brokers involved saying, hey, you know, where's the critical dates letter?
There's a misunderstanding of when this date ends.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
gotcha.
And whether that's a requirement or not, it's not. It's a service, but we always do it because we want to start the transaction off on the right foot, make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as timelines are concerned.
Yeah.
We read every contract, and sometimes, pretty rare, but believe it or not, you guys have conflicting dates.
Yeah.
You know? It's like all of a sudden we're removing due diligence before we've even delivered due diligence, you know, and things like that. So
the whole 5-day stuff.
The 5-day stuff, 10-day stuff. So we're making sure that everybody understands that, you know, this is the timeline of the transaction. And then we calendar everything and make sure that everybody's on the same page about, you know, delivery of information, removal of contingencies. And And then really it's up to the buyer to, understand and do all their due diligence. Once they remove that due diligence, then we get into a list of requirements that are required to close escrow.
Successfully close.
Right.
And transfer title.
Exactly,
Gotcha.
exactly.
Okay.
And a lot of times, depending on the structure of the ownership entity, we're going to need entity documents. There's going to be a loan payoff at some point, most likely, unless the property was owned all cash.
Gotcha.
Proration of property taxes, things like that.
Settlement statement-y stuff.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, once somebody goes through their inspection period, removes contingencies, we're going to work our way through that requirement list. And that's another piece of advice for brokers out there. Once contingencies are removed, reach out and talk to your escrow officer and see what of those Schedule B requirements you can help.
Yeah.
to eliminate, right?
Yeah.
All of this is
chasing
an
down
effort
point
to
of contacts.
chasing down point of contacts. Sometimes there's going to be private notes, loans, right, that are on there. And listen, if you've got a note with a major lender, we've got the contact information. But if it's a private party, then that's something that we're going to need that information in order to contact them and get a loan payoff. And so, getting that help from brokers will always increase the probabilities of closing, which is what we're all working on, right?
Yeah. I like to say brokers' jobs are to get deals across the line, not prohibit deals from happening.
Absolutely.
Right? That's how we all get paid at the end of the day, is to make sure that the transaction goes. And look, every transaction has its hurdles, right? We all know that.
Yeah.
But our job is to facilitate as much unilateral directional communication as we can, right? Like, let's not prohibit things. Let's make things happen, and let's assist at the end of the day. The escrow officer, who is really the quarterback, carrying the ball, right? Like, their job is to get it to the end zone, and it gets everybody to go through and get the touchdown. So,
absolutely.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we pride ourselves on from a title and escrow standpoint is, being, deal makers, not deal killers.
Yeah, for sure.
So we know the cliches: surprises kill deals, time kills deals. If you're not having good communication, if you're not submitting information in a timely manner, all of these things can affect the timeline of escrow. One of the things that I think about as far as challenges is loan payoffs. Everybody thinks that it's just going to happen. Well, most loan payoffs are going to require a 2-week notice.
Okay.
But if somebody's got a secured note, like a CMBS loan, a lot of the times, because those are sold on a secondary market, there's a certain specific timeline that you have to follow that might be the 30th of the month, it might be the 1st of the month, it might be the 15th of the month. And that's all contained within those loan documents. So that's information that we need so that we can time everything
early on too. The
Early.
earlier someone gets all the docs over to you, the better, right? Let's not wait until due diligence expires to figure out the financing. Let's figure out the financing at time. We do another video where we talk to an SBA lender, and he was mentioning that certain loans, to your point, can only be paid off on certain dates.
Exactly.
And the other thing is that I think a lot of listeners find very interesting is that certain types of loans don't prorate to the date of close of escrow. They prorate to a different date. Like SBA loans have one date that they prorate to every single month, and it is what it is. And if escrow doesn't close before that, guess what? The borrower is paying a whole nother month that really it could close the day after that. And the title company can't do anything about that. Right?
Exactly.
So,
well, and I think that also goes back to, when you're drafting the PSA, right? Think about what's happening down those timelines, right? Because we think about this 30, 60, 90, but if 90 days falls on a date that isn't where that SBA loan needs to get paid off, doesn't matter if 90 days, right? We need to actually backtrack into what that date is.
87 days might be better than 90 days. Right.
Or picking a close of escrow date, knowing what that loan payoff date is, right? So getting that information from a previous interview with that SBA lender is perfect, because that's the kind of information that brokers need to know. Because you're the ones helping negotiate that contract in those timelines, right? And as we both know, in different market cycles and different market conditions, that supply and demand can change, right? And, all of a sudden we got a really hot market. You've got multiple buyers on every property. We've got above list price offers. Everybody goes, all right, great. We're going to take the one that's all cash and close in 2 weeks. Well, that's great, except that can we close in 2
Yeah,
weeks?
can
we
escrow
get
do what they
right?
need
Can
to
escrow
do?
get it
Yeah.
done in 2
Yep.
weeks? Can a title commitment get done? Do they need a survey? How long is it going to take for the commitment to get created? And then
Yep.
how long is it going to take the survey to get created once that commitment's created? And so all of those things need to be in consideration
Sure.
when we're negotiating that PSA. And then all of a sudden, and this has happened before, all of a sudden the seller goes, "Oh, I'm going to be in Germany, on that date." And we all of a sudden go, "Okay, well, can you get to an American consulate?"
Can you sign some docs with a notary and we'll airmail them DHL overnight?
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And then obviously all that leads very successfully to what we all hope for at the end of the day, which is a successful close of escrow.
Yep.
And so obviously, from the transactional side of stuff on the front end, we all, understand that the timepiece has a lot of cogs and wheels and things moving in it, but you only ever see the face of the watch, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of escrow's thing. And so I think to extrapolate on that and probably kind of understand a little bit more about the differences of things that are offered, we know there are roadblocks in transaction, but I think one of the things that's always kind of been surprising to some borrowers, and to touch on the title aspect of what you guys do, is the difference in policies.
Yep.
Now, you talked about a survey, obviously. Earlier, you were talking about an Alta survey. And so Alta surveys are obviously an incredibly important part of that because that's going to show what's actually on the property. But then you talk about insurance.
Yep.
Now, there's two types of insurance policies that are offered in general, right? Like the overwhelming majority of it is two.
Right.
Tell me a little bit more about those policies and tell me about the differences that those policies bring with them as a benefit at the end of the day to the buyer and the lender.
Yeah. Great question. So in general, there is a standard policy of insurance and an extended policy of insurance.
Okay.
There's also what we call endorsements that can be added as extra insurance on top of either of those policies, depending on what the concerns of the buyer are going to be.
Okay.
Whether it's, flood or whether it's, all sorts of different aspects of survey coverage and this, that, or the other thing. So that is where we are always going to recommend that a borrower, a buyer consult with their attorney to review that title commitment, understand what their business plan is with the property moving forward. And if the encumbrances, if the liens, if everything that's affecting title is going to prohibit that or not, or if there's concerns that that buyer has about what the future is going to hold and potentially wanting additional insurance. There are some pretty standard requirements from lenders as far as endorsements and levels of insurance. But to talk, going back to standard versus extended, in general, without getting yourself in legal trouble by providing bad advice. Standard coverage is going to cover everything of record. So it's kind of everything that's known, right? And that's where that title commitment comes in, because there's a section of the title commitment that is called Schedule B exceptions. And the exceptions are all the things that are not going to be covered under the title policy.
Hence exceptions.
Right? Because it's us saying, here's a list of everything we know. We all agree that we know these things, right? Here it is, right? Here's the evidence of everything that's affecting title. So you can't come and make a claim about that because you're buying the property subject to all of those exceptions, right?
You were notified.
Right? So the extended policy adds this layer of things that are not of record.
Got it. Okay.
And that's really the biggest difference, is what is of record versus what is not of record.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason why I always recommend extended, not just because it's a little bit more money, but because insurance, if you think about it, we're not buying insurance to protect us from the things we know. We're buying insurance to protect us from the surprises that happen and the things that we don't know.
The unknowns.
Right? Think of auto insurance, even though, again, that's moving forward. You're not buying auto insurance because you know something's going to happen, right? It's the what if of, when it's going to, if it happens.
Right? I don't plan on hitting a Ferrari, but if I do, I don't want to be responsible for that. Or I want to be responsible up to my deductible. And then beyond that,
And then you want the insurance company to pay the rest.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay.
And so that's where the extended comes in. And it's rare because the reality is that we are in the business of risk mitigation. And we are only going to issue this insurance policy based on the information that we know. And that's how we figure out, pricing and everything going along with it. But it's the unknowns, it's the unrecorded document that can come out of left field, right? That wasn't on that chain of title. And somebody says, hey, I've got claim to this. You know, we've seen some cases in the past where there's an easement affecting the property, but it was originated in the 40s. And
it's not going to be recorded digitally. You have no idea.
Well, it can be, but it's not an easement document. I've seen one where it's it's a typewriter that's added to the end of a deed of trust or a warranty deed. Right.
Sure.
And so when they're looking at that chain of title, they're reviewing deeds. But they're looking for those easement documents. Right.
Gotcha.
And if that easement language or some sort of right that I've granted you exists outside of what we think about as normal documents, whether it's a declaration, easement, etc., those are the things that can kind of come as surprises. And somebody says, hey, you can't move that fence. Hey, you can't build that there. Hey, you can't, just pave over this, retention area, and things like that, that affect title, that will affect an investor's business plan, moving
future
forward.
Usability of the real estate.
Exactly. And that's where that extended policy really comes into play. It's rare that those things come up, and we talk about what title and escrow is going to be looking forward. Well, technology from a recording standpoint has improved over time. Right?
For sure.
Like you said, the digitization of documents is huge. But people don't know, especially in Phoenix, that Maricopa County is the most data-rich county in the United States as far as public availability of information.
That is news to me.
There you go.
I knew we had access to a lot of stuff. In the nation, that's definitely news to me.
And so we're a little bit spoiled by our recorder's office. And just being able to pull up recorded documents online without a subscription. California, you have to have a login, and they're gonna charge you for those documents, right?
Pay to play. For sure.
There's other parts of the country, Texas, Indiana, Idaho, that are non-disclosure states. They don't have to record documents, for public availability. So it's going to change county to county and state to state. And so having that information, is obviously critical to the transaction.
And that actually, in all fairness, we've touched on a lot of really important points here, and I appreciate you going into that level of detail. Technology is one thing that I want to just touch on briefly because we've only got a few more minutes. We're in a really interesting place in the market right now. Obviously with blockchain technology, with AI technology, with mobile notary technology and digital notary on the kind of a lot of the leading political voting is like, hey, can we accept this as digital notary? What kind of technologies do you see disrupting title and escrow services? And maybe not disrupting in a negative way, but maybe streamlining that process. I think there's been a ton of conversation recently about blockchain. Where do you guys see stuff quickly, kind of going through and affecting it maybe 5 to 10 years out from now?
Sure. I put a lot of thought into that question because blockchain has been a buzzword for the 10 years that I've been at Chicago Title. And nothing's really happened with it. AI is obviously, the current buzzword of technology. Where I think part of I think the technology side for us is, live look title commitments is one example.
Which you guys do great.
Which is a service that we provide, and especially on the development side, we've got this living working document where everybody can hyperlink into specific documents. Can see updates if something's being negotiated from an attorney, especially on the development side, to be removed from title, or if it's going to be covered by an endorsement. So that openness of information and that communication is a big piece of it. I'll tell you that the biggest concern, though, from a technology standpoint, is fraud and cybersecurity. And so while we think of, especially, blockchain used to be this buzzword, like it was going to eliminate title altogether. Well, we've seen the biggest of companies have cybersecurity issues. And, I think from a title and escrow perspective, you're always going to need that human touch.
Yeah.
You're always going to need that verification and that expertise of somebody who's watching over the process.
Yeah.
You know, fraud is the number one thing that we are protecting against. And AI scares me a little bit in that regard, because
Sure.
one of the things that we do on every transaction is we call to verify wire instructions.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that's not, we don't just, you know, accept a document and go, all right, great, hey, we're going to send the money out.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what's happening is we're getting these false actors that are hacking into our clients' systems,
Yeah.
seeing our emails, and they're doing a good job of spoofing our emails
Yeah.
to send to the client. And we had a situation about a year ago where that exact thing happened. The buyer got an email, said, hey, we're ready for you to wire funds. And by the way, here's your updated wiring instructions.
Yeah.
And, you know, without thinking twice, the person just clicked and wired $3 million.
Oh, jeez.
Well, it was 3 weeks before the closing date. And luckily, the lender and our escrow officer both saw that something was wrong, and we got our national fraud team involved. And same day, we were able to freeze the money in the credit union that the false actor had provided to the buyer
Yeah.
to wire that money, and we were able to recover those funds.
Wow.
Without a fraud department and without an active national fraud department that has relationships with these lenders,
Yeah.
that money's gone.
Yeah.
And we see it
Poof.
less on commercial than on residential, because more of the commercial players in the market tend to be a little bit more professional. It's more of a business transaction.
Sure.
And so they're used to seeing, and they're used to being involved in that transaction. If I'm a buyer of a house and it's the first time I've had an escrow in 20 years and I get an email from the
Yeah. You
escrow
don't even think
officer,
about it.
right? Especially, you know, with somebody who doesn't have the same technological skills,
Yeah.
you know, they're just going to take it at face value.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what we'll see is that email coming through. So that wire hits on a Friday. If we don't catch it same day, by Monday, that money's out of the country.
Yeah.
And
for
so
sure.
that is the biggest concern of ours technologically moving forward. And that's where AI scares me a little bit, because right now we're calling to verify.
Yeah.
Well, what happens when all of a sudden somehow we get a bad phone number,
Yeah.
we call to verify, and somebody's got a
AI.
AI voice that
Yeah.
sounds like the
Sounds
buyer.
exactly like our admin assistant, and they're like, "Yeah, here's our wiring
here's the
information."
wire information,
And then, you know, if you're not doing as many transactions with you guys as like we're used to doing,
Yeah.
right? You guys have our broker closing
Right.
packet, which very clearly puts it.
right,
Someone goes in there, and all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, well, your account number changed." Be like, "Oh yeah, we just switched over to a new bank," right?
Yeah.
You guys are doing so many transactions, so many things. If you don't necessarily do that additional step, it's easy to get in there. Yeah, that's crazy. That's one thing that I didn't really think about, because and obviously the level that Chicago Title works at is millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So
Yep.
huge issue.
Yeah.
Well, we've only really got another minute, but I wanted to ask one last question.
Yep.
What necessarily would be one other thing that's probably important for listeners to understand that maybe we didn't cover? We talked about a lot of stuff, but what's maybe one thing that's a laggard there that we weren't able to touch base on?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is engage early. You know, ask all the questions that you need to ask. There are no stupid questions. We hear that. But, you know, one of the outside of escrow services that we offer is this preliminary due diligence package of public documents.
Which we take advantage of all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
We call it a property information checklist. It's not something that's available, by many other companies, if any, and certainly not around the country.
Yeah.
Because of that access to information and the staffing that it takes to create those reports.
Sure.
But, you know, engage early. Come get that due diligence package, and let's get out ahead of these red flags.
Sure.
Let's get out ahead of these questions and these problem solving,
Yeah.
you know, situations where, you know, again, if I'm a property owner who's owned a property for 20 years, you know, I mean, you just get a little complacent, you know, or you lose track of things. All of a sudden, you know, are you behind on property taxes? Is there a swimming pool violation? Is there another landscaping violation? I've seen it where, you know, somebody's got an apartment complex with a driveway, and the neighboring shopping center that's starting to do redevelopment put a fence right down the middle of their driveway, and you know, it's kind of like, okay, well, where's the property line, and who owns what, and what's going on here? You know,
that's crazy.
We think about maximizing value for sellers. I mean, if I put my broker hat on, you know, any question, any concern that comes up is going to inspire other concerns.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so, especially for brokers going in and talking to owners, through this proposal process and through this opinion of value process, come get this due diligence package from us. Understand who has the loan, understand what the terms are, understand, easements and rights to the property, because all of those things are going to affect how the buyer looks at the property moving forward.
Totally.
And so, that's a value add service that we offer for free to clients. And the beauty of that is that not only are you getting the information early by working with a direct underwriter of insurance, which was only 6 insurance companies in the United States.
Yeah.
There's 150 escrow agencies,
Yeah,
in Phoenix alone. But I've got direct lines to underwriting, to title, to escrow, and I'm in 2 layers below, national approval for, anything up to, $1 billion.
That's crazy.
We've been able to close a couple deals, even one this year, where a title underwriter has said no for some reason.
Yeah.
We've inherited it and closed it in 3 or 4 days, up to $225 million on one this year, where, because we have a direct line to title and to underwriting and so close to those approvals, we're able to execute in a more timely manner and get things approved in a more timely manner than almost any other agency is going to be able to handle, just because of those direct lines and those direct relationships
and
that we have.
Integration.
Exactly. To get to answers and to get to solutions, and the answer is not always going to be yes, but the answer will always include an explanation of why and a path to yes, and that's where we consider ourselves deal makers. Even if the answer is no, it's no, but we can do this. And if we do this, then we'll get there. And then it's up to the buyer or the borrower, to adhere to that or not, depending on what their plan is. So
make their own informed decision.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So again, it's communication, it's openness of information and understanding things to avoid those cliches that we talked about, right? The surprises and the timelines.
Yeah.
And also, with that communication, if you don't hear back from somebody, we assume something's wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
For sure.
I mean, I know you handle it on the principal side of things, and we handle it from all parties, right? It's like, hey, did you get my email? Is something wrong? Yeah, everything's perfectly fine, but that openness of communication and asking those questions and making sure that we're all on the same page so that we can, maintain the momentum of the transaction and the confidence that there isn't anything that isn't being considered is just a huge part of the success of any transaction.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, to that point, you've always been a great partner for us.
Thank you.
Chicago Title has been fantastic at providing both preliminary stuff before we even take a property out to market and assisting when we need it the most. Credit to you, to the entire team over at Chicago Title, and ultimately, thank you for taking a minute to sit down with us. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it. I'm flattered and honored.
If anybody has any questions, we'll include Eric's contact information in the bottom of this video, and we're happy to get you in touch with him. And likewise, thank you for taking time out of your day to touch base with us here at AZOI. My name is Ricky. I work on the AZOI team, at SVN Desert Commercial Advisors. Thank you so much. Make it a great day.